I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you are a transformational leader and if you are seeking modern change mastery, you've come to exactly the right place. I love the opening lines from this Emily Dickinson poem. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Now, I, like you, am seeking modern change mastery. And when I first conceived of the Change Signal project, I knew I had to find, adjacent and unexpected sources of wisdom about change in 2025. I couldn't just revisit the obvious stuff because I don't think the obvious stuff works all the time these days. Now, one clear source of wisdom was going to be social activism. I mean, what can we learn from movements and mobilizations and mass rallies and the like?
So a lot of the work that we do is partnering with different constituency-based grassroots entities around the world and trying to understand how is it that they make the participation or engagement of ordinary people possible, probable, and powerful. And I think those are each different challenges and different hurdles that have to be overcome.
Now, it took me a while to find the best person to speak to, but I think I have it in Hahrie Han. That's who you just heard. Hahrie is an academic, a political scientist at Johns Hopkins University. Her most recent book is called Undivided, and it's this fascinating exploration of how one of the American megachurches works. And actually, we'll be bringing that into our conversation. But it was an earlier book of hers, How Organizations Develop Activists, that really made me want to talk to her. So this is a rich conversation. We're going to invert the usual belief precedes belonging truism. That's a big one. And we're going to explore what it takes to develop people's capacity to navigate uncertainty. Hahrie, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to be talking to you about it. I feel I've got a lot to learn from you. I mean, I'm really interested in the context of organizational life, which is like we're trying to have our organization evolve. How do we have people be part of that? It's a tired phrase, really, with an organizational change. It's like we need to do change with people, not to people. One of the things I know about your work is this idea of the 3P model. I know that in part because I have a 3P model of my own. Completely different context, different thing. But I like a person who likes threes and likes Ps. So we're already connected there.
Right.
Maybe we could start off by just talking about the 3P model as a kind of a framework for kind of understanding how things can move.
Yeah. So I organize a lot of my research through a research lab that we call the P3 lab. And the reason why we call it the P3 lab is because we want to make the participation of ordinary people possible, probable, and powerful. So people have to be able to participate, they have to want to participate, and it has to actually matter.
Let's start with possible. I mean, what have you discovered as this kind of bedrock truth about what it needs for people just to move into that first state of potentiality of being possible, that they could be part of this?
Yeah. There's a ton of work just on the question of what is the extent to which the kind of resources, quote unquote, that people have make it possible for them to get engaged. So people have to have time. We know that participation is often associated with things like material resources, income, wealth, that kind of thing. But I think a lot of what I've realized over the course of my research is that although those things absolutely matter, so I'm not at all saying that they don't matter, that ultimately, participation is a function of what people value. And the challenge is not so much to reduce the costs or to make it easier for people to get involved, but the challenge in most cases is to create value. What is the thing that's going to make me feel like the thing I want to do in this moment is participate in this activity, whatever that activity might be?
Right.
That's a challenge that a lot of organizations, when they're trying to pull people in, kind of don't give enough attention to, and they pay a lot more attention to thinking about like, how can we make it as easy as possible for people to do this thing?
Right.
Which again, all things being equal, like easier is better than not easy. But if people don't see it as valuable, why would they do it at all?
How do you figure out what people value?
Well, there's a couple different ways to think about that question.
Okay.
Let me put it that way. So on the one level, you can always ask people, right? And so I do think that it is important for any organizational leader to be listening to people. Like there's a lot of organizational theorists that kind of think about this idea of like being able to sort of identify signals, that are out in the environment and being able to hear those. And so that's a skill.
And to slide in here, we've got an upcoming episode with John Anthony about motivational interviewing, which is so good. And that's going to help build the skill. So do keep an eye out for that one.
Second, I think that, often there's a gap between what people report as what they want and the kind of underlying deeper interests that
I
really
love this.
move people
Yeah.
to action. And I think that like when in my own life, when I'm trying to work with my children or, work with an organization that I'm involved in, I want to be able to move us to a place where we're in deep enough relationship with each other that we can start to get beyond the surface of the things that I can articulate easily that I care about to a deeper conversation about what are my interests here? Who
Yeah.
is the person that I'm trying to be in the world? What is the world that I'm trying to create? And how does that match or not with um, the opportunities that are available to me right now? And I think that um, that takes a different kind of conversation. It also takes moving beyond a simple transaction into a real understanding of who we are, who we each are as people.
That's lovely. And I think there's also, to your point, there's something seductively misleading about what people tell you that they want, because people are often a bit crappy at actually knowing what they really want. As Henry Ford said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Do you have an example, a story perhaps, of an organization that's kind of figured out that offer that might invite people in?
Yeah. One of the most recent projects I just finished is a big project looking at a group of people who are organizing around issues of racial justice within the third largest evangelical megachurch in America. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
this is a evangelical Christian megachurch that is in Cincinnati, Ohio. They were not this big when I was studying them, but now they're a 50,000 person church, meaning they get
Holy
50,000
cow.
people to show up each week in person and
That's
about
amazing.
500,000 people to tune in online. So they have this huge scale that outstrips most organizations that are out there in the world.
This is where I should get my producers to insert one of those needle scratch sounds. Because you might be thinking, wait, what? Belonging before belief? That seems backwards.
So most people think, oh, it's an evangelical megachurch. That means that first I have to show, my deep Christian roots before I'm allowed to kind of come into the church. And it's actually the total opposite. Their whole motto is that, yes, we're not going to hide who we are. We are a Christian church. We believe that in a Christian God. We believe the Bible is literal. There are all these things that are associated with that. But you know what? No matter who you are, you're welcome, right? We're going to welcome you into our community and we're going to pull you into a community of radical belonging, right? So that means that even if we deeply disagree with your views, whether it's about faith or politics or whatever, you're still a part of us. And that's kind of a really profound idea if you think about it, because what they're saying in a way, I think, is, look, we want to make you feel like you're a part of a bigger community. And then once you feel like you're a part of us, then we can have a conversation about what are the ways in which we disagree and why might we? And they're not shy about the fact that they're trying to evangelize you. So it's not like they're hiding the ball or anything or being manipulative in any way. But they recognize that the first need that people have is to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves in a way, or that they're in relationship with other people. And so that idea of belonging before belief, I think, was really insightful for me in the sense that there's a way in which it encapsulated 50 years of social science research in 4 words, without having to read 25,000 academic papers. That kind of made this point that we're social beings. We have these deep social needs. If you fulfill that, a lot of other things become possible.
Honestly, when you said that phrase, radical belonging, I'm like, okay, I'm an atheist, but maybe I should look this church up because I'd like radical belonging. I mean, that's such a profound invitation.
Right.
And it's a wonderful story. So the P3 model, possible, probable, powerful. If we're moving from possible, and the key insight you've shared here is being able to be clear around not just how to make it easy, but how to make it worth their time. They're actually saying, I'm going to choose this over that. But if I'm moving people into probable, what's different there? What does that look like?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is the kind of invitations that we offer to people and how that differs.
Yeah.
And I think that people have a deep need, in the same way that people have a deep need to feeling connected to each other, people also have a deep need of feeling purpose, And to me, that gets at this question of, do we offer people invitations or opportunities that help them develop and exercise their own agency.
Brilliant.
Martin Luther King, kind of said that like agency is the ability to achieve one's purpose.
Just to say, I hadn't heard that definition from MLK before, and I've jotted it down so you will no doubt hear it again on this pod.
And like we all might have different purposes. This is not predetermining or prejudging what one's purpose should be. But do I feel like I'm someone who can be an architect of my own future? And I think so often the kind of invitations that we offer people invite them to essentially outsource that question of purpose to other people. I do most of my work kind of working with organizations that are trying to get people involved in public life, politics, like different things like that. And often the invitations they offer people are things like, sign a petition, send $5, come out and vote, where basically it's like, look, let the professionals decide what we're going to do with your money.
Right.
Let the professionals decide what we're going to do with a petition or what the petition is going to say. But just, you're basically like an ATM for money or signatures or, whatever.
Just be compliant and just do what we tell you to do, and that would be great. Yeah.
And like, people are smart, and so they know when they're cogs in a machine. So it's like, well, if my $5 is interchangeable with someone else's $5, like why not just go buy coffee at Starbucks, as opposed to putting it here. Whereas I think when you invite people not only into a community of belonging, but into a place where you're asking them and inviting them not just to kind of be a cog in a machine, but to actually strategize about how would you solve this problem, and don't just outsource your outrage to somebody else, but instead think about what you can do. Then people are invited to take risk, and that does entail risk both for the person and for the organization. But it's through that risk that people then become agents of change, and they become to be able to exercise their own purpose in life.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that work that I think about making participation probable is about helping to connect the kind of invitations that we offer people to the ability of people feeling like they can achieve the purpose they want to achieve in the world.
This is brilliant stuff. And I love that you were talking about how do we invite agency in other people, because it feels like just one of the hardest things. Because you can't say, I'm giving you agency, because that's inherently a non-agentic thing.
Right.
You have to kind of somehow make this invitation.
Right.
And then the other part of the equation is, by empowering you, another way of framing what agency is, it means me giving up some of my power and my control and my certainty. In your experience, how do you coach or support leaders of organizations to have the courage to give up some of this control, to invite, probable agency in the people who they want to be part of their movement?
Yeah. I mean, the metaphor I use for the person who's receiving the invitation, right? It's like we're inviting you to enter into a learning process, and it's like getting on a bike.
Yeah.
And no kid learns how to ride a bike by like reading a manual and then getting on the bike, right? The way you learn to ride a bike is by getting on the bike, and then you fall off, and then you get on the bike again, right? And so when we're asking people to learn how to develop their own capacity as strategic agents in the world, they're going to try things, they're going to make mistakes, and then they're going to have to learn from it and then try again, right? But as a leader of the organization, it means, okay, so we're trying to fix this problem. We got all these people involved in fixing this problem, but all of a sudden they're out there making all these mistakes. Like, what the heck are we doing, right?
I think Hahrie summed up one of the deep tensions of change work. On the one hand, I want people to feel agency. But on the other hand, I'd also love them to do it my way and not make any mistakes. But Harry's about to articulate why this matters so much.
And so it's a hard thing to do. But on the other hand, one of the things we also know is that change is only as durable as people's commitment to the outcome.
Whew, that's great.
Right? And the outcomes that are the stickiest are the ones where people feel like they own the results of change.
Yeah.
So the short-term cost of allowing people to kind of get on the bike and fall off the bike is that they're going to make mistakes, right? And you're going to have to live with it and deal with the messiness, and that's just hard as a leader. The long-term payoff is that once they learn how to ride the bike, they're on that bike, It's like you learn for life, right?
Right.
And so I think that there's a kind of way in which I often will talk to leaders that it's not just short-term, long-term, it's also about shallow versus deep, right? Is the change that you want to make shallow, or is it deep,
Ooh, nice.
And I think right now we live in a world in which the stickiest problems that we face are sticky precisely because they need deep solutions,
Right.
which means that we've done a lot of the tactical fixes that we can, but there are some deep kind of human or systemic changes that we need to make. And that's why the problems that keep persisting continue to be problems.
Right.
And so that means the solutions have to match the scale of the problem, which means that I think ultimately we need people to feel like they can both contribute to and own the results of whatever that change is. And so I don't really know a way around getting people to that place without giving people the opportunity to be a part of the solution.
Now, you may well want to know more about Hahrie Han's work and the 3Ps model and some of the other levers of activism that we're talking about here. If so, go to hahriehan.com. So HAHRIEHAN.com. Now, Harry's written several books. One of them I've mentioned, Undivided, about that deep dive into the mega church. But the one that's really got me hooked into this conversation is How Organizations Develop Activists. Okay, back to our conversation. I'd be curious to know what you'd offer in terms of how, if I'm a leader, do I de-risk this invitation to agency? Do you have any guidance on trying to find that balance between setting up some structure to minimize the impact of failure and still allowing people to experiment and try things out?
Yeah, I feel like that's a tough question to answer in the abstract because my first instinct is, well, it depends on what the risk is that you're concerned about. And I think different kinds of organizations are going to experience different kinds of risk, right? If I'm a company, like maybe I'm concerned about the impact on the brand. If we have people out there like misusing our product in some way, right? If I'm a political organization, maybe there's an election that we could lose. So it sort of depends on kind of what the outcome is, but.
And just to interrupt you, if I may, I think there's actually a profound answer right here, which is a conversation to say what's at risk, because there's a way that it's quite easy to rapidly catastrophize around what's at risk, which is like you imagine the very worst of it and you imagine that happening quite easily.
Right.
And in fact, what your answer has already given me is this idea of going, let's get really clear at what truly is at risk and what our risk tolerance is and what we can allow to fail and what we can't allow to fail.
Yeah, like what are we really afraid of here? And then how bad would it be if this thing happened,
Right.
So there's two things I would say in terms of de-risking, though, in whatever context you're in. Is first is the idea of the strategy of small failures, right? Which is that as I'm inviting people into learning how to exercise their agency, I think part of what I should be doing if I'm, an organizational leader is setting up kind of small failures along the way.
And if this is ringing bells for you, wait, haven't I heard something like this before? You might want to revisit my conversation with Charles Conn, where we do a deep dive into why we should favor small experiments over strategy.
By the time people are in a position of making choices that have big consequential outcomes for my organization, whatever the organization might be, that we've had a history and a practice of learning how to fail and then react to it so that the failure becomes less likely,
Right. So as a leader, you can't just say, okay, go ahead and go off and try some stuff and fail. As a leader, you actually have to role model a practice of constantly failing so that you're giving permission in the culture to say, look, this is just the way we do things around here. We experiment, we fail. That's actually progress for us.
Right. But it's developing what I think of as kind of like a reflective practice, that, often the hardest situations, the situations that are riskiest are the ones where there's not a formulaic answer, right? Almost by definition, right? If there was a formulaic answer, we would all just execute that answer. And the reason why there's risk is because you have to navigate some kind of uncertainty. And so how do you make sure that you prepare people for the ability to navigate uncertainty? Well, it's through this strategy of small failures that people develop the kind of compass they need to then, when they're in a position of making big consequential choices, they might make mistakes still. Like, I'm not saying it's perfect, but you have more confidence that that compass at least is in place so that they'll be
Yeah.
able to tack back and forth through whatever the uncertainty is. And so I think that's, like when I'm mentoring people or when I'm managing a team, I'm trying to think like, okay, like here's a situation where maybe we're going to do this thing and if it doesn't go well, like it's okay, but it'll give us an opportunity to learn. And then next time when we are on a bigger stage, we'll be able to have some experience of knowing
Yeah.
what's going to work or not work or something like that.
Hahrie, the other thing I'm hearing there, and I may be just making this up, so tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but there's something about actually, as you move to that bigger opportunity, which feels like there's bigger risk, you're also developing the capacity to break that down into smaller little experiments within the bigger thing. So there's a constant going, how do we now kind of cut and divide this a little bit so we're creating smaller de-risking opportunities rather than going for that one big gamble at the end?
Right. I mean, like as I said, I just finished this big project working with churches, and a lot of faith leaders in the faith world kind of talk about the process of formation. Like how do we form people in their context? It's how do we form people to be, people of faith or something
Yeah.
like that. But I think, in the context of the conversation we're having, you can kind of ask this question of how do you form people to be agents of public life? How do you equip people to be ready to take on big strategic challenges, And so there's and like breaking that down into this process of progressive de-risking and increasing reflective practice, I think is an important skill.
This reflective practice, what should people be reflecting on? What capacity should they be trying to increase?
Well, I'll just tell you a quick story, by the way,
Yeah.
about this. So one of the projects that I did, so before I did this book on the evangelical megachurch, which is called Undivided, my previous project was a series of case studies around successful attempts to organize for kind of political change. And one of the organizers who I profile in this book is someone who had a weekly reflection that he would do. So he'd spend about an hour every Friday, late afternoon. And he kind of, and I just have to tell you that it was so incredible because as part of our research, he turned over like 3 years of his personal reflections over to us. And like I could honestly write an entire book just about those.
Yeah, no kidding.
But what he wrote each week was, so first he would write down a list of like all the key meetings that he had that week and the key meetings that he had the week after. So you can just kind of see like who he's meeting with and like all that kind of stuff. Then he wrote a brief paragraph that was just like an overview of what happened that week.
Yeah.
And then he had 3 questions that he would ask himself. First is, what are the risks that I took this week?
Love it.
The next question was, what are the times when I didn't take a risk and I should have?
Whew.
And then the third thing is, what did I learn about developing my own power?
Brilliant.
And every single week, he had the meetings, the overview, the risks that he took and what happened, the risks that he wished he took, and the places where he thought that he learned something about how to move his agenda forward, which is like what he thought of as power. And it was amazing, right? Like, I mean, I think those questions in a way were kind of brilliant, but what they did was they were questions that forced him to kind of think really intentionally about the choices that he was making as a leader on a week-to-week basis. And I think that discipline was so important in helping him see both forest and trees and helping him develop his own courage to be able to do hard things, because he held himself accountable to this question about risk every week. All the kind of like emotional and strategic and cognitive capabilities that you need to do this kind of work, he was holding himself accountable to a certain discipline. And I think that's the kind of reflective practice that we want to encourage.
I have to jump in here just to say, oh my goodness, I loved this story. I mean, really, if you take nothing else away from this conversation with Hahrie and me, take this. I mean, I love the discipline and the commitment of seeking mastery and kind of burnishing courage. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, as an idea, you might even reach out to other transformational leaders you know and create a small group where you check in each other, answering these very questions. I mean, once a week, once every 2 weeks. It's hard to do this work alone. Okay, onwards. part of what I'm really struck with, which is in times of change, times of uncertainty, we are biologically designed to actually limit ourselves, to shut down, to kind of create kind of tunnel vision. And this reflective practice of continuing to open up, to continue to build capacity, continue to seek risk is kind of counterintuitive and wonderful. We've got a third P on the journey. We've gone through possible, we've gone through probable. How do we get to powerful?
Yeah. So a lot of the kind of organizations and movements and entities that I work with are trying to make change in the world. And so the question is, how do you translate people's engagement into the kind of influence they want
Right.
over the whatever the outcome is that they care about? And if there's like one thing I wish people would take from my work, is the idea that like not all forms of engagement or not all forms of collective action are the same. And so I think the like thing that I object to is a lot of times, if you look at how the media covers social movements or collective action or something like that, they're often just like counting, well, this protest had 1,000 people and this had 100, or this meeting had 50 people show up and this one only had 10, And
Yeah.
I think what we find a lot in our work is that it's not just about sort of like what resources you amass, whether it's people or money or, media mentions or whatever, but it's about how you use what you have,
Right.
and that's the scaffolding, I think, that translates people's engagement into the kind of influence they want. And that question of, how you build that scaffolding to do that translation is a lot about leadership and strategy in terms of taking the contributions that people make and then putting them into conversation with power in the ways that you want.
I mean, this idea of scaffolding sounds really helpful. Can you take us down a level or tell us a story about what that kind of looks like?
Yeah. So just to build on the example of the organizer who who wrote this weekly reflection.
Yeah.
So the work of his name
I
is
feel like
Troy.
I should get this person onto my podcast.
You
It
should.
sounds
He's
like
amazing. You should.
yeah,
Totally should. The work of his that I was studying was a campaign to try to build a coalition in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is
Yeah.
Rust Belt city in the United States, to create universal preschool for children, for the poorest children in the city, with targeted resources for the poorest families. And this is a complicated issue in Cincinnati because it would require people to vote to raise taxes on themselves. It's very racialized because there's high rates of racialized intergenerational poverty
Right.
in Cincinnati. And so there's a lot of political complexity that went on with this. And for a long time, there had been like a 15-year campaign to try to get universal preschool passed. And they couldn't get universal preschool passed. And even though there's all this research that shows like the best thing you can do to combat intergenerational poverty is to invest in early childhood education, couldn't get it done. And so finally Troy comes along and he's like, all right, we're going to make this happen. But, we're going to do this by building this like kind of multi-sectoral coalition. We're going to bring together faith leaders and political leaders and business leaders and like build this coalition and get all this public support. And they were well on their way to doing it. And then one weekend, like Troy went on vacation. He hadn't taken a vacation for like 2 years, so he goes on vacation. And while he's on vacation, the coalition that he had helped kind of build has this meeting that he's not able to attend. And he is like flying home from Arizona and he gets into town and he shows up at this meeting and he realizes that while he was gone, the coalition had made this decision to basically reverse a set of decisions that they had made in the past that changed the funding mechanism for universal preschool. And so this is, we don't need to get in the weeds of it, but the point is that it was a very politically consequential decision that they basically kind of almost did when he was intentionally not there because he couldn't hold them accountable to it. But it helped a lot of the business leaders and the kind of wealthier constituencies who are involved in the coalition. So Troy's like apoplectic at that moment.
Yeah.
And at that moment, it's like there's all this pressure on him to just acquiesce to what everyone else had said.
Look, Harry's going to tell us in a moment how this ends. But in this moment, what would you guess you'd do? I mean, what would your best, bravest, most empowered self do? And what would your stressed out, under-resourced, squeezed by the politics of it all self do? And now, what does Troy do?
And he was like, look, I can't just say on behalf of all these community groups that I've been working with that I'm just going to take this deal that you're offering me. And so before we can make a decision about this, you, the head of the Cincinnati Reds, the head of the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, the head of the biggest Fortune 500 companies in Cincinnati, the mayor, all these big, you're going to have to come and have a meeting with my constituents and hold yourself to account and see whether or not they're going to be willing to agree with you or not, So he ends up in 3 days or something like that. He organizes this huge meeting at one of the big Black churches in the city, which is a very kind of symbolic place to have it.
Mm-hmm.
The CEOs of all these big companies, big political leaders, they come and they sit on stage, and there's hundreds of people from all these community groups that basically are peppering them with questions about, why are you making this choice? And is this really going to be something that's going to be in the interest of the poor community that actually needs universal preschool? And they basically hold their feet to the fire in a way that results essentially in a negotiated compromise where the whole coalition was able to stay together and they were able to kind of pass this bill. And so I sort of tell this story to kind of say, okay, so what is the scaffolding that needs to be built? Well, what a lot of organizations would have done in a moment like that is to sort of say, look, we have a list of 500 names. We can show you how you're going to, lose all the support and da, 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 da. Or, it could have just made the coalition fall apart and say, well, if you guys are going to do this, and we're going to take our toys and we're going to go play in a different sandbox, right? So there are all these ways in which that thing could not have happened, but they were able to hold it together because Troy was really clear about who the people were that he was actually accountable to, which was a set of these community leaders, right? And he had equipped through this strategy of small failures and all the stuff that we'd already talked about, these community leaders to be able to be informed and capable of kind of having this conversation with the most powerful leaders in the city, to be able to be in equal dialogue with them on this question of how they're going to design a policy that's going to benefit their children. And he could pull them all together into a meeting in a few days, so it sort of was all the work that had to go into making that possible when there was this unexpected challenge that came their way. That's the kind of scaffolding that really matters. It's not like Troy knew a year ago, my gosh, I'm going to go on vacation. I'm going to come back and there's going to be this thing and I've got to be ready for it. So I'm going to do all this stuff to be ready for it. It's that just happened and he had to react in that moment, but he had built the scaffolding that enabled him to navigate that kind of uncertainty.
Yeah, there's something extremely powerful. And what I'm taking from this is you're seeing how this ongoing investment in agency of the dispersed people who were going to receive the benefit of this. They're you're not just getting a gift from on high from the CEOs and whoever else. You're actually an active participant in this, and you're an active voice in this. And it was that scaffolding, that investment, that commitment to agency and distribution of power allows that moment when things are at risk for people to step into their power and say, look, I know you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and whatever else, but I'm speaking to you as an equal in this process to say, this is what you need to know about what's been going on.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I always say is that, what differentiates really powerful organizations from less powerful organizations, it's not how good their strategic plan is in the beginning, because lots of organizations can write a beautiful strategic plan. It's more, how do they react to the unexpected challenge that they didn't know was going to come their way when they wrote their strategic plan? And so that is what's really what differentiates really powerful organizations from not. Because when you are working in a certain kind of predictable environment, knowing how to navigate forward is a hard but not insurmountable challenge. But when you are faced with a moment of unexpected challenge, are you ready to meet the moment or not? That's what really differentiates powerful organizations from not.
Isn't that just the essence of us being in change today? Agility, even over strategy. What a great conversation. I mean, if it rang true for you too, would you consider spreading the word? I mean, I love me a review, of course. I mean, give me some stars, give me some nice words on your platform of choice. That's great. But I also really appreciate you personally recommending a favorite interview to someone in your world, or even to post about it on LinkedIn. And if you do that, tag me. Thanks for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.